Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us in this session. We're going to talk about different topics regarding entrepreneurship, innovation, and how all this integration on the region has impact on, of course, capital markets and other factors driving change, innovation, and entrepreneurship in the region. With us today, Cristina Gadala-Maria, principal at QED, Kate Kiewel, Vice President in Bicyle Capital, Jaime Martinez Negrete, Head of Investment Banking for Latin America and Mexico Country Head, the Morgan Stanley, and Pedro de Garay, CEO, GBM. Please welcome them with a great... Okay, so let's start with a kickoff question. I would like everyone to answer it. Let's start with, what do you see are the main drivers and challenges of innovation and entrepreneurship in the region?
Yeah, so I think we're still in the very beginning of venture capital, and QED is a venture capital fund focused on fintech. We've been investing in Latin America for the last 10 years. Nubank was actually our first investment, which we say was a lucky first investment because it really opened our eyes to the region. And I think as we've gotten sort of close to the different markets, right? We mainly invest in Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. We've seen the different maturities. The different maturities of each ecosystem. And I think we're still at the very beginning, to be honest. So I think fundamentally, there's still a lot of real problems to be solved. And the way that I view entrepreneurship and innovation, and the reason why I love what I do, is because I think this is a way to really transform Latin America is through entrepreneurship, right? I think driving innovation, supporting those new technologies, supporting those new ideas, and we start to see success cases, right? Nubank is one that I highlighted, but kind of across the board, we see success cases of startups that now play a significant role in the economies of Brazil, of Mexico, and so forth. And so I think really it's these fundamental problems that if you look at any given market and look at the dynamics of, the costs of getting financial services, the access to financial services, and it doesn't have to be financial services, right? I think in general, access to goods and services, all of those are still there. And so to me, that just presents sort of ripe or fertile ground for new businesses and new technologies to be solved. So I still think we're in day one, not just of fintech, but of innovation and entrepreneurship across the region.
Thank you, Cristina.
Yeah.
Kate?
Wonderful. Well, I share a lot of the same views I think we're very early. I think when we talk about Latin America and the opportunity at Bicyle Capital, we're a growth equity firm, so we invest in Series B to pre-IPO. And for us, where we see the opportunity is really Brazil and Mexico. And for us, it's really the size of the market. And so when we think about what changed the ecosystem, I think we really have to think country-specific and the trends really supporting tailwinds of the big opportunities. I think everyone is here today because we're curious, we're building all in the nearshoring space. And I think a huge opportunity is seeing on the geopolitical level, zooming out from Latin America, zooming out from the US, is that the global centers are changing. And I think Latin America is really, from a trend and demographic perspective, set up to really win as a global player for the first time. We travel around the world to Riyadh, to Abu Dhabi, and the story of Latin America is oftentimes mistold. And it's a really exciting time, even though we're at a bit of an adjustment after seeing such a big kind of hype and wave of capital come in. There's incredible founders. And again, more people are curious, seeing the population of Brazil and Mexico, seeing the incredible talent, and seeing this transformation of an empowered and young generation. I think it's incredible how young the average age of a Mexican, I think, is 29. And so you look at developed ecosystems, I don't have a crystal ball or a time machine, but you look at the growth of Southeast Asia, the growth of China, the growth of India, and we really believe at Bicyle Capital that Latin America is next, and there's a young population empowered with technology that I think are ambitious and ready to take advantage of the opportunity.
Thank you.
I totally agree on both comments. Actually, I more than agree that in GBM we are LPs of QED and Bicyle, and I think that, and I would like to to say that not only the region, but especially Mexico, it's the real land of opportunity. The size of the market, the under-penetration on many of the sectors and industries, and full of talent and new and very talented managers coming up and trying to invest in these great entrepreneurs for ready to execute. I think it's in the first inning of what we will see for entrepreneurship and innovation for the coming years.
I'm also very optimistic about the prospects for entrepreneurs in Latin America and in Mexico in particular. I think we need to separate the essentials for any business, mature or not, of succeeding. And I think as Pedro was saying, demographics in this country, the sizes, the critical mass, the level of education of the people, in particular in Mexico, the strength of the industrial base that we have in the country, all of those are necessary ingredients that are super strong in Mexico, plus strong macro, well-developed financial system, a lot of things. There's another ecosystem that is fundamental for entrepreneurs, which is the financial ecosystem. And I think we should not forget that the private equity ecosystem, the venture capital ecosystem is still very young in our region. If we just look at the last decade, it's been a big swing. But 2021 alone in the region raised more than $15 billion in venture capital, right? Followed by, I think it was 6 or 7, and then obviously the whole world has gotten more complicated. But things are happening that are part of cycles consolidating and demonstrating to investors that in crises, countries don't blow up, companies don't blow up, and also we start seeing some very, very success stories of cycles being completed, of companies getting ultimately to the equity markets, founders making money, investors making money, buyers in the market making money, and we have deals like that. I mean, we at Morgan Stanley have led a few of those that we're very proud of, right? We led the Nubank IPO, we led the Tiendas 3B IPO, and we participate in many others. And those events are not going to be the only ones, and more are in the coming. And I think in crises, positive things happen, and as the markets and investors see how things evolve in a downturn, the next leg is going to be very good. And I think we're close to an inflection point to start, going up again, no?
Thank you, Jaime. I'm going to go back to you. What is, on your take, the impact of the capital markets, venture capital, and private equity on developing the business ecosystem here in Mexico? I mean, we were talking earlier on the Tiendas 3B example. Can you name some of the variables that made this happen?
I think that the Tiendas 3B example is one very interesting from a number of point of views. The first one I would say is that it's just a confirmation that Mexico is truly a great country, right? If we look at the story, I don't know if you guys have read the public information, but it's a wonderful story. I mean, it was founded by a non-Mexican individual. He's a brilliant US-born individual, studied in the US, went to private equity, into Europe, saw a business model that he liked, right, in the hard discount model. And he said, I want to do this for myself. He, quit the fund, raised a little bit of money, and spent a whole year mapping the entire world to see where could he deploy a similar model with success. And any way he sliced it, I don't recall if it was 10 or more variables, Mexico ranked top 3. So you have a guy that, packs his bag, does not speak a dime of Spanish, knows no one in the country, brings his family, and opens his first store, right? And 20 years after, without knowing anybody, this country gave him the opportunity to build a network of suppliers that in turn, gave him the opportunity to compete head-to-head in price to one of the most iconic companies in this country, Walmart Mexico, right? And many other retailers. And he's there, and his financial backers and private equity played a very big role. In that case, Kiewel, based in Paris, was the private equity firm that supported him the most, plus some other investors that believed in him. But he also managed to assemble a terrific team of Mexican executives, and the story is amazing, right? He has created a lot of benefits for the Mexican population, and it's a great story of ultimately culminating in a transaction in the market that's been good for everybody, right? The stock is up close to 80% in dollars, close to 100% in pesos since IPO, and the liquidity is phenomenal, and it's covered by more and more analysts. So it creates a nice virtuous cycle. But it's an example of entrepreneurship in Mexico, of a good combination of what private equity does at a certain point in a company's lifetime versus when the capital markets do it, and of course, it's emblematic of what a country like this can offer in terms of, all of these things: macro stability, the demographics, the growth in disposable income of families, right? The network of suppliers that you can develop. I mean, it's easier said than done, but those are decades and decades of economic stability in a country. No?
Thank you, Jaime. Pedro, and you as CEO of GBM, what's your take on capital markets? I mean, 3B, it's an example of a company going out and listing in the US market. We've seen a lot of companies not listing in the Mexican market, but also leaving the Mexican market just to enlist in other markets. And also the trend of double listing. What's your take in general about this?
I mean, the capital markets are essential to develop an ecosystem on the dynamism of the venture capital, of innovation and the economy. I mean, it gives you access, it gives you transparency, it helps generational families to manage that part of their necessities. The employees of the actual companies really enjoy or really help them to have a public company in order to capitalize what they earn from their stock options. So the capital markets are incredibly important to develop an ecosystem. And I think in Mexico, there are wonderful companies, as Jaime said, and there are coming more companies. And I think the next trend is not only to be listed only in the US. I think it will come as dual listing, because it has a number of benefits. No? At the end, to be listed in your own country gives you, probably you are the best or some of the best or the most important company in the industry at your own country, rather than if you are only listed in the US, you are just part of thousands of options. No? The other one is that the Afores are growing at an impressive rate, and by 2035, I suppose they will have above $700 billion ready to be deployed. Another thing is that, for example, Nubank, that Morgan Stanley was leading, they had the dual listing. And one opportunity they gave them is that, for example, they are not only their customers, but now they are their partners. They offer them stocks when the IPO was listed, and they have millions of new investors from Brazil that knows and consume the company, able to be part of the story. You know? In GBM, we have done one of those stories with having done some follow-ons for the REITs in Mexico. And, you know, the REITs are the most, with the largest number of individuals invested in a single stock in Mexico is in the REITs, because we gave them the same access that the big pension funds or hedge funds have access. So there's a lot of benefits to be a dual listing, and I think that's going to be, hope to be the trend for the next coming issues.
Kate, what's the status of the venture capital industry? I mean, we've seen a roller coaster in the last years. What would you say we're on what's the today's status?
I think that's a big question. I think globally we're in a big reset. I think, as we all know, markets are cyclical, and we ended a big cycle. There was liquidity in the market, and we're in really early days. For Latin America specifically, 2021, we saw $16 billion of capital come in, 8 billion the next year and 4 billion the next year. And I would say it's spurred a lot of growth, but a lot of learning. I would say depending on what stage of company you are, we're seeing the Series A and later companies really tighten their belts, get back to basics, focus on unit economics. Depending on the country, I would say in Mexico, we've seen less activity. I think there's a lot of fear in the market of, oh, it's not a good time to fundraise, and a lot of founders have been advised not to fundraise. I would say it's warming up quite a bit. I think we'll see a lot of activity next year. We're starting to see a lot more Series B come to market after really going back to operating the business. So I would say very optimistic. I think entrepreneurship is a roller coaster, and I think if any region in the world understands it best, it's Latin America. I think it creates the best founders because you're born into always, having to be creative of how to make things work and kind of defy the odds of challenges and things that don't always function. So I would say the state of venture capital in Latin America, I mean, what's really amazing that's different than a decade ago is how many local funds there are. I think there's a ton of crossover funds that actually understand the region, like QED today. I think the quality of investor from 5 years ago, I started investing in the region, 2017, is much higher. There's more investors with operating experience that can actually advise and support their companies. And so I think we think about it on the ecosystem level, and I would say things are moving forward. And I think it's the quality of investors, the quality of founders, the modernization of regulation, specifically in fintech, the boom and then the symptom of a more connected population through the mobile economy, that a lot of these trends are now the ecosystem has supported to actually launch and grow companies at a faster rate. So I'd say the state of venture capital is very curious. We're seeing funds on Fund 3, Fund 4, and it gets real. You have to start showing DPI at that point. But I would say the ecosystem is maturing. I would say see Mexico about 5 years behind Brazil, and that's just more of where it's at from a maturity. I think, as we've spoken, I think before, is certain things will be very helpful in helping Mexico kind of grow. And I think some of that is debt, some of that's credit. But overall, I would say very optimistic. We're kind of in a big reset. And then I think we're going to see diversification. I think the foundations of Latin America has been in fintech. And I would say we're seeing companies in all different sectors now, from healthcare, nearshoring, software. And I would say that's different than the last cycle we were in. So I would say the diversity is also a symptom of the maturity and the quality that's only had momentum.
And if I could just add, I mean, I fully agree with everything Kate just said. And I think actually right now is a great time for VCs to be investing. I think unfortunately we had a lot of what are called tourist investors come into Latin America in the last couple of years and then sort of retreat once the market conditions changed. But if you look sort of at the fundamentals that Kate was just alluding to, and the fact that valuations are now much more reasonable, I think you can find great companies that were started in the last 3 years that have real traction, real businesses, a lot of tailwinds, but they just don't have a lot of options when it comes to capital. So as a venture investor, it's actually an amazing time to be looking for opportunities in Latin America, I would say.
So you mentioned the revaluation, a very good opportunity, and also like when the cycle is at the upside, just there's a lot of cheap money, right? And you pass a lot of red flags maybe in businesses that right now people are more cautious, right?
Yep.
So, and Ana Cristina, on the fintech perspective, I mean, the finance industry, of course, it's very important for developing countries like Mexico. So financial inclusion, it's also a big challenge. On your perspective, how or where is the great innovation opportunity? I mean, we've seen also the unicorns here in Mexico. A lot, or almost all of them have a fintech concept, right, inside their business model. So where did you say is the big opportunity in fintech in Mexico?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're fintech investors, so we obviously are very big believers in the future of fintech, and we still believe that we're in sort of, the early innings of what it could be. I think we're a global fund, so we have the benefit of, looking at the US and our investments there and different regions, and then comparing Latin America to that. And I think so there's several things that, in my opinion, make fintech investing in Mexico and LATAM specifically interesting. One, I think, is just the amount of capital that is tied up in like concentrated in the big banks. And I think, I don't remember the exact number for Mexico, but just, I think it's like 80% market concentration in the top like 5 banks. And they have profit margins that no bank should have, right? And I think what that leads to is just a lack of incentives to innovate for the customer, which in turn leads to very bad experiences for customers because banks don't want to serve them. They have no incentive to make it cheaper, user-friendly. The point was alluded on Nubank, right? And sort of what they capitalized on. So I think in general, there's a lot of profit held among the banks and sort of no innovation from their side. So I think there's an opportunity to disrupt not just on cost, on access, on user experience, but also I think there's like 2 layers, in my opinion, to fintech innovation. One is just the basic, which I think we've gone through, the basic access to, right? Like access to banking, access to lending, access to payments, like digital payments, access to insurance. And that's just at a broad level, right? Like digitizing these types of services. Next, we have like the nuanced versions of fintech. So do we go into business banking, business payments? There was talk of international transfers, like cross-border payments, especially at the enterprise level. Like that's a huge opportunity that nobody has really solved, right? And not just sort of within Latin America, country to country, but also, LATAM US, LATAM China, LATAM Korea, now with the nearshoring opportunity. So I think there's a ton of innovation in terms on the business side. And then I also see it on a vertical level, right? So I think you can build solutions specific to different verticals. So whether it be a supply chain. So we're investors in a company called Fincargo, for example, here in Mexico, which is supply chain financing, especially for importers. You can go into a prop tech and sort of do, specific to a prop tech. So any given industry, I think there's versions of that innovation, and especially if you compare it to markets like the US, where you see like multiple layers of innovation. We're still on like the very beginning for Latin America. So I'm very excited about what is coming. I think, the pandemic and the last couple of years have been a really big progress forward just for the dynamics of consumer behavior, of, accustomed to using digital banks, digital payments, and so forth. And so I think we're just kind of now starting to see the effects of what can really be built in on the fintech side.
Great. So we're going to pass through quick questions and quick answers. Everyone, please tell me, what industries or sectors are you most bullish on for the next 5 years?
Investments. I mean, that's what we do in GBM. It's about how we can make Mexico a country of investors. And I think we are in the really early stages, if you compare it not only to the developed markets, but to all of our peers in the emerging markets. Mexico has a great potential on keep on growing, on bringing more investors and having the benefits to become an investor and not to only people who say.
In Mexico, I think there's a huge opportunity in healthcare. There's some companies that are doing wonderful things. I think there's still a ton of opportunity in financial services, as Pedro is saying. And even in more traditional sectors, we see some wonderful companies in retail, and there's in infrastructure. There's also a ton of very interesting companies. So several sectors.
On our side, I would say we're actually not thesis-driven. We're not sector-focused. What we're looking for is category winners. We think you can be the best number 3 and you're still number 3. And so we're looking for capital-efficient businesses. We're looking for incredible entrepreneurs with an unfair advantage, with a go-to-market plan. And if you segment kind of, at least for our 2 big markets, Brazil and Mexico, we think Brazil has a very advanced fintech landscape with very sophisticated infrastructure that allows to layer on top high-quality businesses. We think the next wave that will touch fintech is identification and verification. And then in Mexico, undoubtedly, we really think the nearshoring opportunity is very unique. And we see teams from around the world coming to build companies here. We see a huge battle in the direct-to-consumer kind of neobank landscape where there's 10 players, some from banks, some from around the world, some from Asia. And so on our side, I think, again, a very connected economy and young population. We think, as Ana Cris said, I think the pandemic, now is the wave of seeing the growth of e-commerce, the growth of payments. And I think specifically in Mexico, we haven't even started accelerating at the speed we're going to see in the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm. I have to say fintech. So fintech.
This is a question for Pedro and Jaime. What needs to be done in order to strengthen the Mexican capital market? We want to have more IPOs, Mexican IPOs, more Mexican listed companies, not only big companies, but smaller ones. What needs to be done?
I think that on the company side, I'm less worried. I mean, people say, all these delistings, Mexico don't have companies that are ready for markets. I disagree with that. I think we have phenomenal entrepreneurs in this country. I think we have phenomenal companies in this country. What I would do is mostly strengthen on the demand side. I think that if I compare, right, Mexico with Brazil, for example, right, in the last 20 years in Mexico, we've had a little bit less than 60 IPOs, and in Brazil, like 260, right? A lot more. And Brazil is only 20%, less than 20% bigger than Mexico, right? But when you compare the liquidity of 2 markets, Brazil trades 12 times more stocks than Mexico every day, no? And that's a function of a few things. I think there are decisions that governments take that impact in the very long run, and I think the Brazil market, the Brazil government, privatized a lot of very large companies via the markets, and that has given a lot of liquidity. But also, I think going back to the demand thing, we need more capital in Mexico that is measured in pesos, so that you can have more investors willing to play in smaller stories. I think depending on global capital for IPOs naturally raises the minimum size that a company needs to have, because investors always need to nail it in several things. They need to select the right management team, the right company, the right sector, the right valuation. And if your thresholds as an investor are measured in dollars and you're investing in a company that generates pesos, you need to care about the effects, right? And therefore you need more liquidity from the get-go. And that raises the size of a company to do a successful IPO in Mexico. In the US, we see a lot of smaller IPOs. In Brazil, we see a lot of smaller IPOs than in Mexico. So we need more funds. I mean, obviously GBM is a leader in Mexico, but we need more money to be managed by the funds of GBM. We need more players with like GBM that produce intelligent research. And there are things that were done by prior governments, and it's not the one that just finished. This was a mistake of 2 governments ago. entrepreneurs in Mexico used to be taxed when they IPO their companies at the same tax rate that an investor in the market would be taxed, right? And someone had the idea that it was bad, and they, if you're an entrepreneur in Mexico, you get taxed at the highest, income tax rate, and that's also been a big disincentive for owners that say, it's expensive to list because generally founders have very low tax bases. So there are things to be done, but I think if I were the government, I would try to support more local asset managers so that there's a larger number of participants. For an IPO to be successful, you need a lot of investors thinking similarly, right? You need to know that there are guys that are going to think like you, and they're going to buy if the stock is below a certain price, and they need to have money. So I think there's a lot to be done on that end. No?
I mean, I totally agree on what Jaime says, and the market it's between demand and supply, but it's also about incentives, the correct incentives in order to produce that dynamism in the markets. And I think one thing is about the taxation that Jaime was saying about the regulations on lowering their necessities to become public. As in Brazil, you can do an IPO at a smaller size than what in Mexico is the expectation of having an IPO. In the demand side, we're trying to bring some more investors into the market, and I think that is one of the parts. But also the supply, it needs to be with the correct incentives. Just to give you also what can bring more IPOs, not only about the new companies of venture capital, but also, for example, the government companies. It would be great to be public. In Brazil, there are 15 of the government companies trading in the stock market, and in India, it's more than 50 government companies that would bring funding, that they will have access for creating projects, that will bring transparency, corporate governance. That would be amazing. And also the multinationals, companies that are operating in Mexico, for example, we only have two, Walmex and Kimberly. And in India, there's also, I don't know, more than 50 or 60 of those multinationals trading in the Mexican market. So I think we need to create a plan among all of the participants on regulators, intermediaries, and investment bankers, everybody, to bring a plan and to make a robust capital markets in Mexico.
Thank you. Ana Cristina and Kate, Mexican entrepreneurs say that it's tough growing up a business in Mexico, but you oversee different markets around the world, and you see strengths in the Mexican economy, in the Mexican people, even talent. Please tell us what are the benefits and great opportunities of entrepreneuring, creating businesses in Mexico, especially in the early stage.
Well, the easy one is geography. I think that's why nearshoring, truly, you can't factually change that for any other country in Latin America. I think there's strength in being connected to the US and along with talent. I think that the talent in Mexico is really strong. And what's very unique is Mexico has a history of building incredible businesses just in old businesses, in retail, in commercial, in infrastructure, etc. And so I think that the foundations of the past are actually very strong for Mexico. It's about how do you apply technology for where we're going in the future. And so I think, again, there's a ton already here. There's just a modernization process. And then I would say really the next generation of, I go back to it, but I think having such a young population, we're going to see countries across the world, Japan, China, with such aging populations that aren't going to be there to really grow their economy and be strong consumers. And that's where the size of the population, young population, geographic advantages, I think, again, for a long time, I've been the biggest fangirl of Mexico in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think geography is actually a really big part of it. Just proximity to the U.S. is a huge advantage, and talent, as Kate mentioned as well. I think the other thing that we find exciting is just relative to other markets, like we've mentioned Brazil a couple times, but just seeing the potential that Mexico has, right, in terms of what is still unsolved, and looking at sort of the raw ingredients that we have to solve that makes it super exciting to invest in, because, you know, we still have a long way to go in terms of, we were talking earlier, the depth of capital markets and sort of local funds, like imagining a world where all of that comes to fruition, right? Like having deeper capital markets, both on the credit side and the equity side, having progressive regulation, not, you know, for us, it's obviously fintech is important, but generally, right? Like having regulators on board and incentivizing more of this innovation. I think we see that, you know, the raw materials are there. And so that sort of motivates us to continue investing in and building for a better Mexico, right? And so I think, and Mexico is just one example, right? I think obviously there's other countries in Latin America that have a much longer way to go, and don't have sort of the size of the population that Mexico has, I think there's also a lot of wealth in Mexico that, you know, is concentrated among some of the businesses and so forth. But I think all of that can actually be channeled into the right way, and that could have a really interesting impact on the future of Mexico.
Great. Okay, we're gonna go again. A question. I want to hear your the answer for each of you. What keeps you up at night, considering the year we've been, change of government here in Mexico? There's also going to be elections in the U.S. Geopolitically, conflicts around the world. In your business, in your perspective, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, for me, sorry, I'll start. For me personally, I think it is the exits in Mexico, because I think we're early stage investors, and so it's really easy for me to be optimistic and see sort of the raw talent and the entrepreneurs. But at the end of the day, if we don't have exits and success stories, then it's really hard to continue that ecosystem evolution. And so the lack of exits, and I know Jaime and Pedro might have something to say here, but I think, you know, the lack of successful exits in a meaningful way keep investors still cautious about Mexico. And so I think if we want to make this sustainable, for me, it's, you know, that keeps me up at night is, you know, can we sustain this? Can we see more exits? Can we sort of go on to the next evolution of capital?
I completely agree. I mean, as a growth equity investor, I would say we're not generally in the global space of where you're playing, not the most popular stage, because it's a macro problem across the world. The IPO window has been closed for U.S. companies, you know, and again, you have to think about the region kind of compartmentalized. Of Brazil's just been farther along in different ways, and so for us, it's exits, but it's also thinking about the founders. I think coming back and building. I think we see founders make life-changing amounts of money. We saw secondaries become very popular in the last cycle. And for us, I mean, we're in it as investors to see it through to IPO or acquisition. And I would say there's something that's changed in the dynamics of rounds where founders might be selling early, and it's oftentimes very strategic, but I think changes some of the fundamentals of getting through the hard moments and growing the company through a full cycle. So on our side, I would say still very optimistic, but I would say the rest of the world doesn't quite have the perspective that we have being in the region, or they truly don't understand the difference between a Chilean, Brazilian, and Mexican. And you realize maybe an Argentine doesn't want to buy from a Mexican and vice versa. And so I think there's cultural nuances. And the last thing I would add is I just think LATAM is really misrepresented on the global scale. We did research over a 5-year period of the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. And of course, all the headlines were about currency risk, political risk, cartels. when you click in, there's a little bit more depth, but unfortunately, risk, lack of liquidity, corruption is what come up. And when people are in a good mood, it's tacos and football. So on our side, again, we know this is misrepresented. And so we think, again, the bridge of Latin America on a global scale, of having a little bit more kind of cross-pollination would be really positive just for kind of the image, because right now I don't think the media has portrayed the true value and opportunity.
GBM, it keeps us wake up at night. It's some just things that we can control, and the things that are in our hands is two things. How can our investors take better decisions every day, and create wealth for them and their families? And two, how can we go faster than what we are going? For us, the opportunity of disrupting the market about investments, it's still really big, and we are in the early innings. That all in our minds is how can we go faster?
I guess what occupies me the most, or what worries me the most, is not is not the downside, right? I think that the country, in the downside scenario, is going to do okay. I think this is a great country, as I already said, but I think that what worries me is capturing the real opportunity that we have in front. I think the biggest concern or frustration over the past decade or so is the opportunity cost, right? With everything that this country has, we can be doing phenomenal things. I think we have a very good opportunity. I'm very enthusiastic about the new president that we have. I think we have a very intelligent woman heading this country with great intentions, with a very clear diagnosis of what this country needs. She knows that there are things that need to be solved in a lot of places, starting, of course, with security and the like. So I think that she can make a huge difference, and I'm optimistic that we will. But that's my biggest concern, making sure that it's not okay, but it's great. No, it's phenomenal going forward, and I think we can do it.
Jaime, Pedro, Kate, and Cristina, thank you very much. Thank you for being here.